Welcome to The Impact Effect, hosted by conscious leadership expert Tom Eddington, advisor to some of the world's most successful companies and CEOs, where each week we help executives, entrepreneurs, and organizers become more effective leaders while growing businesses that are making an impact in the world. And now, here's Tom.
Hi, welcome to the Impact Effect Network, a place where we discuss making business matter through conscious leadership. I'm Tom Eddington, and I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Dr. Tiffany Jana, CEO and founder of TMI. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, and I'd love to have you just share a little bit about your background and how it is that you came to do the work that you're doing.
So I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner and author, and I come to the work actually by way of a family business. My mother was a pioneer, or is a pioneer, in the diversity space. She came up in the civil rights movement and then started standing up offices of multicultural affairs around the world, across the country. So I was just kind of following behind her for years, and then I went to business school and created my own iteration on a theme.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So who are the organizations, leaders you're working with? Any particular sector, governmental sector, academia, nonprofit, for-profit?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because the work that I do is both sector and industry agnostic. So I work across government, nonprofit, for-profit, educational. I work with nations. So it's local, national, and international. And as long as you've got people working together towards a common goal, you generally have an opportunity to optimize your inclusion.
I've made it a point of being industry and sector agnostic throughout my career. I've approached it from a place of intellectual curiosity and knowledge transfer. And what is it for you that has you working across sector?
Well, I believe that everyone has the right and should have the opportunity to earn an honest living, doing things hopefully that they love, serving into a cause that matters to them, and be allowed to and be invited to be healthy and whole in the process. So the idea that visionary leaders would create space to create inclusion and to welcome greater diversity within their context creates just a welcoming and healthy workplace for everyone. So I do the work where people are because that's where we spend most of our time.
When I think about my career over the last 30 plus years, in the early I'll call it era of the work that you're doing, folks were just talking about diversity. And it's been such a welcome and refreshing expansion of that to be talking about equity and inclusion. And it would be great for our viewers and listeners if you could share a bit about that evolution.
Sure. I actually consider myself a Jedi worker, not just because I'm a Star Wars fan, but the acronym that I love at this point is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So it did start out post-civil rights as a diversity industry, and that's just the bodies, right? So all of a sudden we had women in the workplace, we had people of all different races in the workplace, abilities, etc. So what do you do with all of these people? So diversity just is who's there. Inclusion was the next evolution, and that was, oh, wait a minute, how do we invite people to join the work, right? So we've got all these different bodies, but if you're really not inviting people meaningfully to join into the work, then all you have is a great, picture for your website or your annual report. So it's important to allow the best of those identities to actually show up and come to bear on the solutions that you're trying to create. More recently, we've started to see equity, which is super exciting because that's when we start looking at what are the experiences that everyone is having across these demographics. So like my pioneering space is bringing metrics into the space. So we're able to actually quantify equity gaps in experience. Are millennial women having a very different experience from boomer women? And we can calibrate that quantitatively. So equity is about making sure that everyone has the tools that they need to succeed, regardless of demographic. Am I just as likely to be promoted, to be successful at this organization as anyone of any other demographic? And then the justice has been added now, because now we're looking at, like, certainly as you think of a post George Floyd lynching world, we're talking about a conversation where people are recognizing, okay, historically marginalized groups, protected categories, these are very important. And it is the collective injustice that has taken place over time that has caused certain demographics to just have sort of less in the way of automatic advantage. And so we as leaders and organizations and, cities, states, countries have an opportunity to make things right that were once wrong in service of greater justice for all.
Well, there's a lot of rich content there that I want to dig into in this conversation. So let me start with the metrics that you've developed and how you're going about it. I'm assuming you're both taking a quantitative and a qualitative approach to measuring what's there. And as we all know, what gets measured is is what people pay attention to.
Precisely.
So could you talk a bit about the qualitative and the quantitative tools, your instruments you're using to get the metrics and the data and the information?
Absolutely. So all told, the development of the tool, the primary tool that I'm using, it has been about 12 years in the making. So we're, validated, longitudinally field tested. There's all scientific rigor that's involved. The tool is called Loom the Culture Map, and you can find it at loomtheculturemap.com. And it's like a weaving loom. All the different threads come together to make a beautiful tapestry, a beautiful whole. And what we're doing is we're actually measuring, mapping, and improving organizational culture using the power of digital technologies. It will eventually be an artificial intelligence play. We're still in the process of collecting the vast amounts of data required to do that. But we're essentially, we use like a questionnaire platform to get into the measurement of over 80 different interpersonal and organizational competencies measured across 11 different categories. And what we're doing is we've created a scoring matrix that sort of aggregates a broad basis of variables that we're calling culture, right? So as a CEO, as a leader, I can talk to you about my financial plan for the next few years. I can talk to you about my marketing plan. I can talk to you about all kinds of, strategic plans. But do we actually get into the granular specificity of intentionally calibrating our organizational culture? Most often the answer is no. We just hire a bunch of people who we hope are good, and we hope they all get along and it works out great. And that is a ticking time bomb. So when you say, right, what gets measured gets done, if you're actually able to calibrate what are the competencies that people are working with, instead of just hiring and promoting based on technical competency, we start to look at things. I hate it when we call them soft skills. I like to call them interpersonal competencies, because those soft skills can land you on the front page of the wrong paper for the wrong thing. So we call them competencies, and all the tools and skills required to keep you off that front page for the wrong reason are exactly that. They're tools and skills that can be taught. So we look at calibrating where the organization is, where the individuals are. We provide basically a digital scorecard that lets the organization know exactly where they are at that point. So we're looking at those equity gaps in experience. We're looking at leadership capacity. We're looking at which divisions, which departments are creating an amazing sense of belonging. My company is 100% aspirational, so we don't do blame and shame. Yes, we're going to identify the opportunities and the deficiencies, but we're also going to identify the aspirational spots where, like, the companies like that Loom the Culture Map, we're really only using with companies that have more than 250 people. So the thousands and thousands of people, even better. That's the scaling model for something that we tested out on a much smaller basis. But if you're going to measure these kinds of things, when we look at our scorecard, we're also giving people an implementation roadmap that tells them exactly step by step what needs to happen to get them from point A to point B. And that first assessment is only half of the product. What we do between 18 and 24 months later is we reassess. And that's where we get into DEI ROI. We're able to see how much we've moved, how much we've improved. And there's not another practitioner in the entire industry that I know of, if you find one, let me know, that actually holds themselves accountable and holds their clients accountable for the work that has to be done in that space. So it's an incredible tool. And then obviously the numbers only Numbers only tell part of the story. So when if we have anything that pops up where the numbers are not, give us more questions than they do answers, then we look at focus groups and we look at representative demographics to get down to the bottom. And we've never failed to unpack a number story with qualitative input.
And so when you're looking at the various dimensions or elements of culture, what are some of the attributes or the elements that you're measuring?
So a lot of the things are things that, or in organizational development, leadership management that we're already familiar with. So we're looking at leadership skills, we're looking at communication, we're looking at teamwork, we're looking at emotional intelligence, but we're doing all of this through the central lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we actually quantify unconscious bias at scale. Now, I will never say that Jonathan in accounting has a gender bias problem, but I sure will say we're gonna throw some extra unbiased training in the accounting department, right? So we never disaggregate down to a level that's going to expose any employee. We do not give our clients the raw data, so they can't even try, because while the leadership may engage with us, we are there to serve the employee experience, to make sure that people are safe, right? So we are disaggregating that data down to safe levels.
Okay. So in the work I do around conscious leadership and my focus both on the show and the coaching and consulting or advisory work I do, it's helping leaders become more self-aware about themselves, the way they're showing up in the world, and how aware their organizations are. And so for me, that's a critical foundational piece of conscious leadership is self-awareness. And so when I think about the work that you're doing, each of us have a personal narrative. Each of us have a set of beliefs that are founded on our life experience. When you're talking to leaders, when you're approaching an organization to do your work, or they're bringing you in to do the work that you're doing, what are some of the critical things you do right up front around helping them or determining how aware they are?
So initially, everything has to start with strategy conversations, right? So we start with executive strategy conversations, because you're absolutely right. All diversity work must start at the individual level. And I believe that is one of the greatest leadership challenges we all have, is to be able to, how can we experience ourselves the way that other people experience us, particularly those who report to us. So that's a huge challenge. So we actually start in a very qualitative space there, because at the executive leadership level, all it takes is one detractor, only one, right? One powerful detractor can derail any kind of change, any kind of change process, but certainly diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it is our job as consultants to go in and find out what is people's experience with this, what is their relationship to these topics, and how game are they for the actual hard work of shifting their own internal heart calibration, their own internal mindset to do this work well, because there are 3 variables that are pretty much guaranteed to cause this work to fail. And that very first one is leadership buy-in from the top. So if our leaders are disconnected from their own personal development, from their own, psycho-spiritual development, then it's going to make it a lot harder. So we've got to really find out where they are with that. The other ones that are guaranteed to make it fail are a failure to set out clear and specific and measurable goals, correct? And then the failure to embed accountability. You can have the strongest strategy in the whole wide world, but if the board of directors says, "Oh, we're exempt from this. This is just for everyone else," I won't take that client on. I can't work with you, right? I don't care if it is. That's one of the hardest messages to share with people, is that your rainmaker, right? That person who just delivers, who you love so much, has been given every opportunity to embrace the new values, the new behaviors in the culture, but they are an absolute toxic nightmare. And what they are costing you in terms of cultural, in terms of that cultural value and that cultural buy-in, it's not worth it. And you've got to let that person go if they're not buying in. That's a really hard message. But without those 3 factors being calibrated appropriately, it's going to fail. And I don't want people wasting the money.
Yeah. So when you are doing your work, what are some of the things you notice? What are some of the things you observe in terms of prevalence of some of the issues that are going to get in the way of organization success? What are the challenges that your clients have in receiving the information that you share with them? And then when they get to implementation, if you could talk through those areas, that would be great.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that comes to mind is the framework of like the duration of the work. I'm thinking about the offboarding process from day one. I want to calibrate exactly how I'm going to transfer this into your hands, because we do not want you to be a client forever. If that is the case, if we own your initiative, then we have failed you. So really making sure that we do that well is part of that matrix. Okay, I just lost track of the question. What was the question again? I apologize.
So when you're going in and you're talking to the clients and you're starting to observe some of the information, right, and then you're reporting the information back to them, and then they have to implement it.
The pitfalls. Okay, yeah. So the first thing that I think about is for that duration calibration. It is the size and the age of the organization are the biggest variables that are going to affect how effective, how expeditiously we can do this, right? Expeditiously, right? So when you have an organization that is very, very large and very, very old, they become very, very set in their ways. We do this because we've always done it this way. And look at how successful we are. It's been great. What do you mean you want to change these processes? So my second book, Erasing Institutional Bias, really kind of speaks to that idea that, not very many people are creating policies where they're like, okay, how many demographics can we exclude with this procedure that we're embedding into our system? That's not how it works, but it is actually how it works. Like we inadvertently will allow antiquated language, exclusive language, policy systems, procedures, and structures that unintentionally leave people out, will allow those things to persist for a very long time. And so thinking about, getting their heads wrapped around the idea that everything, absolutely everything, has got to be available for scrutiny if you're going to calibrate something that is sustainable, something that becomes embedded and becomes the way. The other thing is that there has historically been a kind of an impetus to isolate the diversity work into some kind of a silo, right? Mm-hmm. A person with a title, a small little, council group, whatever. And the paradigm that I like to use to reframe this for people is information systems and information technology. If you go back 40 years, right? And you think about information systems, information technology. If you had a dude in the basement who you called up when a Texas Instruments calculator broke, that was like a big deal. And it was always a dude, and he was always in the basement, right? Well, then you go back 20 years, 15 years, 25 years, and you start to, we realized, wait a minute, if we embed information systems and information technology meaningfully throughout our business system structures, right? Our way of doing business, that it would accelerate, exponentially increase, and change the pace and the way that we do business. I believe that is the nexus point that we're sitting at right now. The inflection point for Jedi work right now is that one. It cannot be, a brown gal in the basement. It's got to be meaningfully embedded. There is not a single key performance indicator that you can identify that I can't tie back to diversity, equity, and inclusion done well that isn't going to help support what you're trying to accomplish. But it's about learning to look through that Jedi lens and really, embed these values in ways that are sustainable.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Who you are is how you lead. Conscious leadership is an intuitive, intentional process requiring an open heart, an open mind, and a committed desire to fully own how you show up in the world. If you're a CEO, a solopreneur, or a community leader, Tom Eddington's ebook helps you amplify your strengths, making you the best version of yourself. Download the ebook today and become a part of bringing conscious leadership to the planet.
And so how do you help the leaders you work with in particular look through that lens?
Well, first we use placeholder people to do it. So in 2018, we launched something called the Fractional Chief Diversity Officer offering. And back in 2018, there were still a lot fewer Chief Diversity Officers than there are now. And now, in terms of Fortune 1000s, they're proliferating really quickly right now. What I think is interesting is that there's no codified template for what a successful CDO, sort of what does it look like actualized, right? And that's why I love Loom the Culture Map so much, because it is the best of decades of work in this industry calibrated into creating something like that. That roadmap, the implementation roadmap, is what I call the chief diversity officer's dream. You can literally put it in their hands and say, here you go. This will get you to the calibrated destination that you're trying to get to. So the fractional chief diversity officer, we use that role to help model the value of having that lens, right? So our fractional chief diversity officers would engage with our clients, and they would show up to any and all meetings that people wanted them to be at. I affectionately called it the Olivia Pope hotline. When the racial uprisings happened, all of the clients that had us on the roster were able to get to someone's cell phone immediately and start thinking about how they were going to react. So they started to, as we started showing up and participating and just looking at their systems, listening to how they talk. Once you have someone modeling that role for a while, it becomes more and more clear that, any decision that is going to affect our people is worth looking at through a DEI lens, full ecosystem view of who your company is, what are you doing, what are you prioritizing, who are you leaving out, and I haven't seen a better tool for that full, kind of, it's like a 360 review for the whole company.
Right. So when you're having a conversation with leaders, what are some of the obstacles, some of the challenges you have in helping raise their consciousness, raise their awareness about their blind spots around what the organizational challenges are?
Well, it's a lot easier now, I can tell you, buddy, right? I mean, I've been so fortunate. I've been in business 17 years, and the very first ad that I put anywhere, like Google Ads, was January 2020, because we were launching this product, and it was like, okay, we have a thing, but in 17 years, 100% of our clients have found us. It's been by word of mouth. It's been based on this quality of service, which is such a blessing. So before this moment, before the pandemic both of COVID and of racism, right? It was a much harder thing. It was an uphill battle, which is precisely why I didn't chase clients, because if I have to chase you, you're probably not ready. So in the beginning, it was always leadership that came and said, okay, help us, because usually adverse litigation, honestly, right? Then in the last 5 years, more and more, it's been energy from the bottom of the organization. It's been independent contributors saying, you know what, we love the company, we love the organization, we love the work that we do, but we do not like the way that we're being treated. We understand that there are people in the world who can help us have a better workplace. We're not trying to go to the newspaper. We're not trying to file EEO reports. We just want you to just do better by us, please, for the love of all things holy. And so more and more clients started coming to us that way. The biggest challenge with getting leadership to, just kind of wrap their heads around it and do the things that need to be done was always this notion that diversity was a dirty word, that if the, blue-haired brown person comes in and starts talking about race, then we're going to get a lawsuit, right? You're going to blow things up and you're going to make us racist when we weren't. And it doesn't work that way. And we also had the amount of cleanup that I've done, my industry has no barriers to entry. Zero unified standards. No one is certifying anyone. You can literally just wake up and say, oh, heavens me, today I'm going to be a diversity practitioner. And you are fully qualified. What is that? So that is why my obsession with metrics, because who is holding anyone accountable? This is bananas. It's absolutely bananas. So people are billions of dollars being spent in this industry, zero accountability. That's crazy. As a CEO, I want to know where every dollar is going, and I want to know exactly what I'm getting for my money. And that's the service that we're trying to offer. So the biggest challenge is the risk piece. People are afraid to do this work because they're scared of what it's going to expose that might have stayed underneath, which I think is wait, you're scared that we might find something that's actually there. Okay. And so I'm an aspirational person, right? Shiny lights and unicorn dust. Okay. So I don't like leading with the risk case, but here's the reality. I've been the survey, all of the survey, including its platform, has been in development for a dozen years. we've actually been deploying surveys for about 7 or 8 years. Okay. And here's what we've done when we calibrated. When you commit to engaging in a metrics-based process, like I don't even accept clients that aren't looking for a minimum 1 year engagement. So it's 12, 18, 24 months to start, right? So if you engage in a long-term process that is metrics driven, okay, and something happens, right? Thomas goes rogue, does something terribly sexually harassing, and now there's a lawsuit. Guess what? I can't do anything about your old lawsuits that you were sitting on before I got there. But anything that happens on my watch, when we have calibrated where you were, created a roadmap and a plan for implementation for getting it better, actually implemented, right? And we're somewhere in that trajectory, and you've already pre-planned, because remember, I won't sell you one survey. That's half a product. I will sell you a minimum of 2 and hope that you go on a monthly subscription and calibrate into perpetuity, okay? When you've got that set up, when you show up in court and Thomas is talking about all the things and the person that Thomas hurt, company gets to say, hold up, wait a minute. Thomas went rogue. Here's what we did. Here's the DEI vision we created. Here's the investment we made in calibrating. We were very clear about the kind of culture we are. This is not representative of our company values. We don't know what got into Thomas's head. We've actually watched our clients win those cases because they were engaged in a process that was metrics based.
That is absolutely fantastic.
I love it. I'm such a nerd. I love it so much.
So what are some of the obstacles that you encounter with your clients? What are some of the challenges when they're exposed to the information at the initial assessment and as they're going through the work?
So, I mean, the initial thing, like the thing that brings people to the table more often than not, and I'm not sure if that's actually your question, but I think it's always worth saying because it's so common. It is, oh my gosh, Dr. Jana, we didn't mean to be an all-white organization, but we are. Can you help us?
All white, all men organization.
Exactly. I mean, it happens all the time, especially when we're looking at like tech and stuff like that. So it happens. And it is, I'm again, grace for the self and grace for the other is my mantra. There is no need to make anyone feel bad about who they are. There's no need to make anyone feel bad about who their ancestors are. I do believe that we have both individual and collective responsibility to do better, right? To make an intentional choice as the human beings we are today to do better. And that's a responsibility. And if we take that on, then great. But, we hire people from our networks, and we're more segregated now than we were in the height of legalized segregation. We hire people who went to our schools. We hire people we want to have a kombucha with. I don't drink beer. I'm gluten-free, right? So I hire someone I want to have a kombucha with. And that doesn't create inclusion just organically, right? So that's right. The first thing that brings people in. How people react. Enough people that I think it's cool call me the CEO whisperer because I speak the language of ROI, right? I'm going to show you data. First thing I'm going to do is last year I spent 90% of my time on the road, and I do a lot of keynotes. I do a lot of public speaking, and now I'm doing virtual fireside chats where I will, if people want to see my talking head, they can go on the internet and find it. But if I'm on screen, on Zoom or whatever, with one of your senior executives, and we're engaging in this conversation, the first thing I want to do is establish trust with your team so that they understand who I am, what my company values are, why we do. I don't have a job. I don't work. This is a vocation. This is deeply spiritual, deeply personal work that is making the world a better place, one company and one person at a time. So I want the employee population to feel that energy coming from me. It's palpable because it's real. So that when the assessment time comes, they feel comfortable and safe and willing. Like back in the, one of the predecessor assessments that we did was we used to use, I was considered a distinguished educator with Turning Technologies clicker technology. The very first assessments that I deployed were with these clickers because I told my clients, if you can put butts in seats, I can put clickers in hands. Don't never need to know who anyone is. And we would get over 95% participation every single time. And people were comfortable being honest because it could never be tied back to them. So I, took that evolved into something else entirely. But what I learned was that when you take much more than statistically significant, I'm not talking about 30% population. I want everyone I can get to participate and participate fully, because when I go back to the CEO and I say, great company, y'all are profitable, y'all are doing great, and you're growing fast, but here are some things that we might want to address. And you've got 5 leaders in these different divisions who are killing it. They are creating a sense of belonging like no one's business. We've captured that. Now we want to codify it and we want to proliferate it across the company. Why introduce new things when things are going well? We're just not good at replicating what's working when we're talking about people systems. It's just not what we've been calibrated to do as leaders. We help people do that. So people love it because they get, like, even our beta clients, I felt so bad. We have this, huge bank, financial institution that was one of our beta clients for the first version of the new product, and we didn't have a dashboard. It was just a hideous MVP. They got a 90-page PDF, and this CEO loved his 90-page PDF because it told him so much about what was happening, and we were able to get, again, like, tactically deployed resources right to the heart of the matter. We didn't have to waste 1,000 trainings on 600 people that didn't need it. We were able to go right to where we needed to go. And so people love it. And then when we have the opportunity to add the qualitative in, because we want to have more information, when executive leadership is able to hear the stories, anonymized, of course,
right.
Hear how the lived experience of their people actually feels, they get highly motivated to do the best they can by them.
What I love about the work you're doing and the way you've approached it and your intention for doing it, it's about creating healthy organizations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Healthy organizations, happy people. Like, yeah. I just, I built the workplace that I wanted to be in after being in contexts that were, absurdly unhealthy. Right. And so I have taken all kinds of liberties with my own employees and, created so much flexibility and unlimited paid time off and all kinds of things that make no logical sense. But I have the most fiercely loyal and amazing base of both full-time and part-time and, adjunct 1099. The whole network of people who are part of the TMI ecosystem are amazing. And part of what makes our system work so well is that they come first. Yep. Right. So pandemic hit and it was like, there's no question about, like, we closed up shop before March. We closed up shop, I think, second week of January, February. We were like, no. Safety first, health first, always. Like, when you privilege your people and all of them, it is amazing how much they will do for your company.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network, the world's first 24-hour on-demand business and leadership video and podcast network, bringing conscious leadership to a global audience.
When I was doing some of the early employee engagement work back in the early mid-90s, we talked about stay, say, and serve. The low bar around employee engagement is that they don't leave. They don't go work someplace else. They stay with you. The next level up from that is that they serve, and they're there to serve the organization and serve themselves. But the next level up, which is what you're talking about, is they're ambassadors for the organization. They live, they breathe the values of the organization in their interactions with each other, with the suppliers, in the communities they live in, and with the customers.
So it's funny because stay is not part of my calibration. The very first thing I do when I interview someone is I want to know what you're really passionate about, because no one ever woke up and said, oh my God, I want to build Tiffany Jana's dream when I grow up. Like, that's not a thing. So I want to know, what is your extracurricular activity? What is your highest aspiration for life? And I want to intentionally spend whatever years we have together calibrating your experience so that you can go and get your dream. I don't want your exit to be sad and like surprising. I don't want it to feel like some act of disloyalty that you have to carefully calibrate your soul around. No, let's plan this together. And I will use everything, like co-create some awesomeness while you're here. And let's see what your, what your spirit, your vitality, what your passion and talent can add to the situation, because every single person can add such new dimensions into any system if you just let them. Invite people to bring the fullness of their experiences to bear on your solutions, and your company will be so much better in ways that we can't even calibrate. It's so amazing. So when we do that together, then what we do is we say, okay, now let's create a plan for getting you to the next place that you want to be. And I will throw the full weight of my international network behind getting you to that place, because you did serve me for a minute, a year, 5 years, whatever the case may be. But that makes me so excited. And it's, my boards haven't always loved that approach. It's definitely challenging for the institutional knowledge, but I like to keep it agile. So we're always changing and flexing and growing. But I want to see happy people out in the world doing amazing things.
So, I mean, from my perspective, and I suspect from your experience as well, that's very unusual. It's not the typical employer-employee relationship. It's incredibly conscious in my definition, and I'd love to hear your definition of conscious leadership.
Yeah, so conscious leadership, in my mind, it kind of works in concentric circles. I call it concentric circles of care, and it starts in the nucleus is your relationship to yourself. If we are not deeply and intimately in touch with who we are and the legacy we want to leave behind, the Henry Cloud's wake, our integrity, what is behind us in every interaction, every single interaction. There is no conversation, there is no text message, there is no phone call, there is nothing behind closed doors or on the front page of the paper that is exempt from who you are as an individual. Like, that gets calibrated first. So a conscious leader is aware of that, and they're being very intentional about that movement. That next level out is then within the context of our organization. Are we caring for the people who work with us as if they were our own family? There should not be a differentiation between what I want for my children, what I want for my spouse, what I want for my parents and my siblings, and what I want for the people who work with me. I mean, for the longest time, my CEO salary was so incredibly modest that it hurt my feelings. But it was more important to me to be able to offer, full benefits and, and respectable wages to everyone. Right. So I've never made 400 times more than anyone who works for me, and have definitely toyed with the idea of, how about everybody just makes, a couple of few $100,000 a year, even if you're just sweeping the floor, because I don't want to sweep the floor, but the floor needs to be swept. Right. I don't know, might be a little socialist of me, but I just want everyone to be taken care of. And I think that's that next level of care is that community level. And then the next level out is that much broader kind of societal. Like, if we are leaders of industry, right, we have our hands on the levers of economy. We have an incredibly outsized impact on the entire world, that is society at large. So as leaders of industry, as people with our hands on the levers of economy, we have an outsized ability to impact the day-to-day lives and well-being of people on the opposite side of the planet. As human beings, we have an incredibly well calibrated ability to ignore that truth, to pretend that every purchase doesn't matter, to pretend that, every decision, every investment, every hire, every, new supply chain entry is somehow less significant than it actually is. Every single one of these decisions has an effect on the entire world. So the more awake we are, the more conscious we are as leaders to who we are within ourselves and how that expresses and affects the people around us, who we are as leaders and how that affects the people we're meant to serve, and then who we are as, sort of visionaries and people who have access to changing the face of the globe. That is a huge responsibility. So a conscious leader is one who is intentional and responsible with that energy.
Well, I absolutely love your description, and I love the three concentric circles. That's certainly how I approach conscious leadership in the work that I do, and it's part of the value of this show, is to help people really see from all the different perspectives of conscious leadership. the dimensionality and the importance and criticality of each of those three concentric circles.
And they're all so important, right? There's no exemption. And it's so fascinating to me to see how one set of rules applies in your home, and then another set of rules applies at work, and then another set of rules applies when you choose to vote or not to vote. Like, everything matters. We have a very limited time on this watery ball, this spaceship we call Earth, right? And I think that if each of us were to only take responsibility for our individual contributions within each moment, right? At each board meeting, with each interaction, we would have a very, very different state of affairs in every facet of being.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Is your team tuned out? Are you looking for a powerful speaker to motivate and inspire your organization? Then Tom Eddington is the choice for keynote speaker at your next conference or event. Tom is one of the most sought-after business advisors and coaches in Silicon Valley. For over 2 decades, Tom has advised world-renowned CEOs and executives on how to catapult their organization's success, including Hewlett-Packard, NBNA Corporation, and Royal Dutch Shell. In his dynamic keynotes, Tom offers fresh new paradigms on how to create healthier, happier, and more purposeful workplaces while navigating change and generating higher degrees of success for organizations. For information on booking Tom at your next event, contact eddingtonadvisory.com.
Well, I have absolutely enjoyed the conversation today, and I would just like to ask a final question. What would you like our listeners to leave this conversation with?
Yeah, so I'm an educator at heart, so it is always a beautiful opportunity to remind folks that, particularly in this moment, it's hard. Like, I never thought it could be so hard to be a white person, but right about now, I think it is the moment in history when a lot is being asked of our human family, and particularly those of the lighter persuasion. And so for those who are allies, who are taking it upon themselves to be conscious leaders, the individual, gut-wrenching work of taking that responsibility on, it's hard, but it is so important. And I personally am really grateful to each of you who are, reading the books and learning the things and giving yourselves access to things that, frankly, your world and your country have denied you. It is not anyone's fault that we're in this space. Like, we inherited this mess, but everyone who's taking up the mantle and taking on the responsibility of learning and being intentional in that space, like, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you choose to read any of my books, which are very, kind of self-helpy in that way, the thing that I like to leave people with is my personal mantra of having grace for yourself and having grace for others. It's hard work, and I'm a diversity expert by some people's measures. And every single day I mess up. Every single day I step in what I call a hot steaming pile of diversity doo-doo, right? And I apologize, and I try to make it right, and I move on and try to do something different next time. So if I can make mistakes in this space, then I invite you to have the courage to keep moving through this space and have grace for yourself when you do mess up, and then have grace for others as they're bumbling along on this watery ball, trying to go along the same journey as well.
Well, thank you. It's been an absolute joy being in conversation with you, having you on the show. And for the viewers and listeners, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and to learn more about what you're doing and engage you in work?
So my company is TMI Consulting Incorporated. So TMIconsultinginc.com is where you can find the company. loomtheculturemap.com is where you can find more about that tool. And I'm Tiffany Jana on all social media. So if you Google Tiffany Jana, you'll find out more than you never wanted to know about me.
And your books?
Books, they are like where to find them?
Yeah, where to find them?
So we like to be conscious in our purchasing. So if you want to shop local and be super responsible and help a small retailer, my favorite local bookstore is Chop Suey Books. So chopsueybooks.com. And you can actually order the Dr. Jana Anti-Racist Book Bundle, where you'll get 3 of my books. 2 of them were just recently listed on Forbes' top 11 books that you need to read if you want to be a more inclusive leader. But they actually have autographed copies that they'll send anywhere you are. So chopsueybooks.com.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Good.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Thank you for joining Tom Eddington on the Impact Effect. Visit impacteffectnetwork.com to connect with Tom and discover additional episodes featuring today's top leaders making a global impact through conscious leadership in the world today.